Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed from the Highland Park Conservative Temple in Highland Park, New Jersey. And joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler of Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanofsky of Anshe Chesed in New York City. We're happy to talk to everyone. We're just starting out again, noting 418, day 418 of the hostages' captivity, praying that each day that goes by brings us one day closer to their release, to their freedom, and noting in solidarity with the families, especially those of people, students, Omer Nutra, and Barry, your student still held in captivity. We embrace them and think about them and pray in solidarity with the Jewish people throughout the world for their release on this day 418, noting also that we're in the first day of a ceasefire in Lebanon, praying that each hour that goes by is one hour without rockets and without any other activity in the north. And we pray that this ceasefire will hold, and that things will be quiet. The prospect of people going back to their homes, we'll leave that for pundits and analysts to think about. But we're going to go back to Torah and to find our consolation and comfort and joy and inspiration in Torah. And we have this incredible parsha this week, Parasha Toldot, which takes us into the home of Isaac and Rebekah. We met them last week. They fell in love really quickly. He loves her, and she is quite an extraordinary person in her own right. But like many of the matriarchs, she is not capable of having children. There is quite a lapse of time before they are able to have a child. 20 years go by. Um, and the pregnancy, as we learn from the beginning, is a difficult pregnancy. They're twins that she's carrying, Rebecca. She prays, and they're born. And we'll start with the birth, which is that Vayetze Harishon Admoni Kulo, one comes out, the first one comes out. He's red, hairy, mantle all over. They named him Esav. Vayacharechen Yatza Achiv, and afterwards his brother emerged holding on to the heel of Esav. They named him Yaakov for the pun on the Akev, and Isaac is 60 years old when they are born. And then we get the nice verse, two verses. Vayigdelu hanarim, the boys grow up, okay, in classic biblical fashion, they grow up really quickly. Esav becomes a hunter, ish sadeh, a person of the field. Yaakov ishtam, Jacob a mild man, Yoshev ohalim, he dwells in tents. Vaye'ehav Yitzchak et Esav. Isaac loves Esav, kitzayid befiv. He had a taste for game. Verivka ohevet et Yaakov. Rebecca loved Yaakov. No reason given. So I want to just focus on that for a second, and I want to kind of cite maybe some of the explanations, some of the parshanut on this. Turn to you, Barry. Just flesh this out for us, if it were, or just
Well,
elaborate.
that's Esau's job is to flesh things out.
Okay, so we
But
have aside from the fact that there's parental favoritism going on, which itself is problematic, but what is going on here? And
I think that in your introduction, you glossed over the other name of Esau, which is mentioned or suggested, which is Seir.
see,
And the boys, as the oracle makes clear, are not just two sons, they're two nations. They operate on a personal level as individuals, but they also represent nations. And what we see here is a kind of developing civilization. So Esau is kind of a farmer and a hunter-gatherer. And it's striking to me that Isaac has a taste for game, which means he likes hunted meat, not domestic meat.
Mhm.
Right? I assume that that's a difference that's being mentioned here. And Jacob is a shepherd, I think, the tent dweller. And looking back from 2024, I think we could say that shepherding is not the last step of civilization. Shepherds don't leave much of a trace in material artifacts behind them. That goes more with farming. And so we see, I think, a representation of conflicts in building civilization. Where should we be? And as I mentioned before we began recording, that in these beginning verses, Esau reminds me very much of Cain, who is the first farmer, perhaps after Adam. And he also is a problematic firstborn.
So I'm having a difficult time trying to square Asaph as a farmer. You're basing that on interpreting Ish Sadeh,
Right.
right?
That's following Sforno, granted a late in
Medieval commentator.
interpreter.
So it strikes me that a farmer and a hunter would require different skills and different, you know, in the romantic portrait that I have of Esav, which is that here's a guy that you know has learned how to hunt or learns how to hunt, um, and really has no mentorship in the hunting life.
Nimrod. He's the great
Nimrod,
hunter.
according to legend, yes. So, but hunting as a solitary sport, or hunting as a solitary, or hunting as something that requires tremendous amount of information and ability, and you know, I mean, here we're at a lot.
So this is what
I'm
I would
also
add.
never tasted hunted meat, so
So the earliest stage of civilization is the hunter-gatherer.
yeah.
So that's clearly how Esau is described. But because he's identified as an Ish Sadeh, I think we're led to conclude that he's kind of a bridge figure because agriculture is taking place now, and people are in the process of settling down into what will become cities. And there's a great deal of tension, but we tend to emphasize Esau as the hunter and therefore uncivilized when I think we should focus more on him being an Ish Sadeh on the way to civilization. And Jacob then is not superior to Esau because the shepherd is between the hunter-gatherer and the farmer, the way I understand the development of civilization.
Interesting, interesting.
That is interesting. I see this as I see this as like partly playing out and anxieties about masculinity, right? That I'm not going to read Ish Sadeh as about an occupation so much. Clearly, it modifies Yodea Tzayid. He knows how to hunt. So he's in the field. I don't really think it means that he knows how to grow grain or something like that. I just think that it means that Esav, who comes out hairy and is like portrayed as a little brutish, knows how to live out there among the animals, and he comes back with an antelope. And Jacob is our JPS translation gives us for Ish Tam, gives us a mild man. uh, he's a mama's boy a little bit. And we, of course, all of us who read this story, uh, anybody reading the Torah is by definition on Team Yaakov. And I think that part of what we're playing out is this historical association of Jewish people as like bookish lads, and not the biggest macho man in the world.
So you're imagining then Yaakov is wearing glasses.
Yaakov so who's going to play the characters? Dwayne the Rock Johnson is going to play Aesop, and Woody Allen is going to play
What
Jacob.
you come on, no,
Yaakov is Nevish.
he's Yaakov studies in yeshiva all day. Why does Isaac love Esav? And the
And
Torah,
so part of the answer to that question, I mean, this is not the one and only way to read the story, certainly, but um, part of the answer to that question might be uh, Yitzhak's own wrestling, because we talked before we started recording of Yitzhak's sort of professional success, and he's and he is good at farming, and he is good at shepherding, and he grows rich, but he's also the character who has been traumatized by certainly a very traumatic moment, to whom God said, "Listen, maybe don't go down to Egypt. I'm not sure you can handle that." And he's the least active. He's the most passive of the patriarchs.
Well, let's understand that the Kitzayid Befiv.
So who is that referring to?
Ah, okay.
It's
Not
not,
well.
this is one of those confusing biblical phrases where we have a pronoun that could refer to either Isaac or Esau.
So Isaac loved Esav because game was in his mouth. Who is
Right,
game was in Isaac's mouth, game, or he had the taste of game, Isaac, or he had the taste of game, Esav.
right. And what I want to suggest is that perhaps this is the Torah's way of saying that Isaac loves Esau not for who he is, but for what he is, which is not the way we want to be loved.
Which wait, what do you mean? What's explain
In
that a
other
little?
words, he's a hunter, so Isaac loves him because Isaac's not a hunter, right? Isaac is a shepherd or a proto farmer. That's how he's described elsewhere in Breshit. But Esau is, an active man. He's the alpha male of the family.
This is what I think is partly being played out here. The dad who was never good at sports himself is
Loves the
so
athlete.
psyched because his son is on the basketball team.
Right.
Maybe,
But if
maybe
the son were not on the basketball team, we're invited to think that maybe the father wouldn't love him so much. And I think maybe that's going on here. So what distinguishes Isaac and Rebecca here is that Rebecca looks at Jacob and loves the whole person. Isaac looks at Esau and loves part of him.
He's playing.
well,
This is how I'm reading this exactly as you just said. By the way, Rashi says about the that ambiguity of whose mouth. Rashi says, quoting in Midrash, is that the simple semantic or pshat reading is in Isaac's mouth. That is to say, Esav put his antelope in Isaac's mouth, so Isaac loved him. But the midrashic reading, as Said Bafiv, means he had entrapment in his mouth, means that Esav deceived him. Esav's mouth spoke sneaky words and led him to deceive his father, and that's why. I mean, obviously, Esav, the character in this story or in this parsha, is not a bad guy. He's a whatever. He's a big dumb goofball,
A
but
buffoon.
he's a buffoon. But he's not a bad person. But the midrashic story has him a bad person. Uh, but what you just said, I think, is what we are led to believe in this story is because there is going to be a succession story. It's like uh, Roy Starway. What's the name of the company in Succession? Uh, Waystar Royco. There's a succession story here, and Kendall and Roman are fighting it out. And the fact is that Rebecca knows the truth that Jacob is the guy who's supposed to take the leadership,
so
and Isaac, who's blind, just doesn't see.
that's what I want to ask you. Do you think that he does not see a worthy successor in Esav, or do you? I mean, Said Befiv, whatever we want to interpret it, that he likes, the taste of game. He brings him certain, has this romance with hunting, etc. All of that, are the possible interpretations of this. But does he not see Esav as, just simply not the right stuff for succession? Is Isaac blind to that? And is
I'm
Rebecca?
not so sure. I want to go back to the Midrash for a second because the way Jeremiah described him, Esau, following the Midrash, was that he was deceptive with his words. That phrase being deceptive with words best under describes Yaakov, who we have two parshiot about him deceiving people with his words, and the undertone here is that Esav wants to be Yaakov and he's just not very good at it. He's
Yeah,
not happy being himself, but also he can't be who he wants to be either. And that I think matches Isaac because I don't know that Isaac ever really is comfortable in his own skin.
interesting.
And, part of the tragedy of the Akedah for us as readers is we don't really get good insight into Yitzchak's reaction to the Akedah. We can understand how it had a tremendous effect, not for the positive on him, but we don't really get any insight to Isaac processing the Akedah.
Well, I would, differ only in the sense that he's able to form a relationship. He's able to marry. He's able to love. He clearly adores Rebecca. He becomes successful. The question as to where the Akedah functions in his life, later life, I think that that's really a subject of great speculation and imagination. But it 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 seems that he does okay. Now, in the end of
Okay,
his
I want to make two
yeah,
quick points. First of all, I think that the other person who Esau reminds us of is Ishmael. And
okay.
part of what's going through the Breshit story is that Isaac also wants to be Ishmael,
Uh,
that wild man of a beast of a man, whatever it is,
just
Paradam, I
parenthesis,
think it is.
Asaph will marry Ishmael's daughter later on in the story, but go ahead, keep going.
Right. And the other piece of it is, when you were describing him forming a relationship, having children, raising a family, I'm reminded of numerous Holocaust survivors who, after the war, went on to build families and and get jobs and reclaim their lives, but it was imperfect because they never escaped the war.
Uh-huh.
And we sometimes forget that. So looking from the outside, they do all the things that we think are normal, but when they're doing them, they're not necessarily normal.
Okay.
And we have to keep that in mind with Esav as well,
Uh,
and Isaac.
so I want to, I mean, you brought up two different stories here, and the Cain and Abel story and the Isaac Asaph story, and I'm going to ask this question in terms of, how as a strategy for reading the Bible and reading Genesis in specific, um, when when we read these stories, to what extent we're layering over or mapping over this story, those previous stories, and you've made a direct connection between Ishmael and Yitzchak. But I'd like to go back to the archetype of all brother stories, sibling stories, which is Cain and Abel. And do you said here, and our viewers and listeners may have noted this, right? That Esav is the Cain of the story, and Yaakov is the Abel of the story. Now, Yaakov is not exactly the victim here. So, can you just flesh that out for us, as it were?
Okay, so what I think I was referring to is that Cain is the farmer and Abel is the shepherd. And in Cain and Abel, the farmer kills the shepherd. And we know that anthropologically that makes sense because farming is going to replace shepherding. I don't know how far back we have to go before we find shepherds in our own
Well, they
ancestors.
they don't replace shepherding. They coexist with shepherding, or
Well,
they
no, eventually they don't because shepherding ceases to be, right? It becomes part of a farming activity. It
okay.
doesn't disappear completely,
Yeah,
but you no longer have semi-nomads.
right.
Who's left of the semi-nomads? The Bedouin,
Yeah.
who are not who don't have large numbers of people.
This
Mm.
is
Um,
this, by the way, is because it's in the musical Oklahoma too, right? The competition between
the
the
cowboys
farmer
and the
and the
farmers, yeah,
yeah,
but they must be friends,
they
unlike
should be
So
friends.
Cain and Abel.
but pasture animals, I mean, ranchers, that becomes the evolution of shepherding, although there are still, civilizations of communities in the world where shepherding exists, that's what,
Right, but what's interesting when we think about the United States, what makes ranching a successful business is wide open spaces,
yeah,
right? The amount of territory covered by the buffalo herds, for example, is extensive, right? It's the western part of the United States. Many Israels would fit into the west of the United States.
yes, okay.
So it doesn't necessarily work in the constricted land
Yeah,
where you
yeah.
have much greater diversity in ecoclimates than you do in the Western United States.
So let me
One small
go.
interesting point about this is the sort of buttresses where Barry's going about this is something I've never understood. Like in rabbinics, um, they speak very negatively about those who raise behema daka. It's like it's like basically illegal according to the rabbis to raise goats and sheep in Eretz Yisrael. But that makes no sense because um, first, why is it illegal? Because they will eat through everything and they will go into people's uh, private fields, and so it's economically destructive, according to that way of thinking. Exactly as Barry is saying, economically destructive to raise sheep and goats, and so we don't do it, and we favor agriculture, and the shepherds are considered a problem. But of course, it makes no sense because they also had clothing out of wool. That was what their clothing was, and so yes, in point of fact, and there was all the sacrifices. So in point of fact, there were, um, small behemoth dakat, sheep and goats, all over the place. But economically speaking, it's a problem.
All right, so let me go to the question that is bothering me, which is that in mapping over the Cain and Abel story to Jacob and Esau, we have a kind of inversion where Jacob is a perpetrator. Jacob is the one that causes the victimization of his brother Esau, and I'd like to flesh that out a little bit in sense of, what does he do to Esau, and what are quote unquote his crimes? His crimes in the first story is that he purloins the birthright from Esav. He steals and he destroys part of Esav's identity. And the second story where he steals the blessing, having disguised himself as his brother, not only has he stolen his brother's identity, but he's stolen what would be the parental gift to the brother. In other words, emerging from this parsha, Esav is hollowed out as a person. Are you seeing Yaakov as a perpetrator here of sins or of crimes?
So I think it's important now to go back to the birth story. So the way we traditionally understand it, when the boys are born, Yaakov is grabbing onto the heel of Esau. And the question is why? Is he trying to be the firstborn because he knows inside the womb that he's supposed to be the firstborn? Or had Esau actually displaced them and he's trying to reclaim what is was supposed to be his? And Esau, had a better first move to the opening, you know, the Gale Sayers of to use the football metaphor. Um, and so how are we supposed to understand Yaakov's name? So one way we understand it is that he is the supplanter. So he is going to triumph over Esau. That's already predicted by the name. Esau represents two of the traditional enemies of the Israelite and later Jewish people. First Edom, and then later all of Christianity. And I think that it's a foundational myth where we want the younger to vanquish the older. Just like many of us, if we don't have a clear stake in the game, want the underdog to win and not the favored person or
Interesting.
the favored team.
So supplanting, as you said, is part of this story, and Jacob is the deceiver, the victimizer. It is a little bit complicated because we are his descendants, and so we are going to root for him, and we do. It's sort of the Torah's greatness in evoking the blameless naivete, of Esau, that our hearts go out to him too, because his suffering is so poignant. Uh, but Jacob is leadership material when he steals the Bechorah, which I think should be seen as the financial part. Like the way inheritance works in the Bible is you divide up the estate into as many portions of inheritors that there are plus one. And so the two brothers will divide the estate into three, and the oldest one will take two parts, and the younger one will take one part. Or four, if there were four brothers, you would divide it into five, and the oldest one would take two sections, but two portions. But that scene in which Esau despises the birthright and sells it for a bowl of soup is maybe not entirely irrational in his part. It's because he comes in, he says, I'm dying of hunger. I'm dying of hunger. And some of the commentators will also think in this direction. So like, I have a very dangerous job. I go out there in the field, you know, I'm chasing the antelopes, and the lions are also chasing the antelopes. And this little, my little brother sits here in the tents with mom. I have a very dangerous job. Statistically speaking, I'm not likely to inherit anything. Either I'm going to die of hunger right this minute, which is his impetuousness, or it's the dangerousness of his job. So, yeah, I'll sell off my inheritance future for a bowl of soup. Okay, that part is stupid, but it's not entirely irrational for him to make an economic benefit now for the benefit he doesn't ever expect to receive. But the other part, the blessing, is about the leadership and his status in the family, and that's the part that he really does steal his identity. The Aesop, when he realizes has been tricked, he says, Yaakaveni ze pa'amayim, he has tricked me twice. Um, and this calls to mind, what is the meaning of his name? In Jeremiah chapter 9, this is a tremendous verse. It's Ish mere'ehu hishameru, the al kol ach al tiftachu. Every person should beware of his neighbor, and do not even trust a brother. Ki kol ach akov Yaakov. For every brother Jacob's. Every brother is a twisted, deceiving Jacob. The kol rea rachil yahaloch, and every friend is treacherous. So Jeremiah, if you can read this Jeremiah verse as a commentary on our story, the name Jacob means deceiver or treacherous one or something like that. So if this is a perush of the name or an interpretation of the name, it's really mean.
Right. But we have to add here that Jacob comes to be known as Israel because Yaakov's name, Yaakov, is also supplanted. However, it's not eliminated because throughout, Bnei Israel is also referred to as Bnei Yaakov because you never can entirely escape your past.
Hmm. I want to go back to the question, do you think that Jacob is aware how um, deficient Esau is? Look, here's
Isaac,
the, the
Isaac is a. You mean Yitzhak?
no, no, Jacob himself, in the first story where he learns the birthright from him, I'm reading vayazed as a word that is connected to zadon, to malice, and that there is a malicious impulse in Jacob in doing this because he sees that Esau is just not the right material for carrying on the covenant. That Jacob understands something about the dynasty, about Abraham and Isaac, and he understands something about the connection that God has, and he's saying to himself, "Look at this. Okay, God, my grandfather was this amazing man with whom God speaks, and God made a covenant. My father is a decent man, and he's the bearer of this covenant. And now, what's going to happen? In other words, there is I'm projecting into the story some knowledge that we are going to inherit this, and that this guy, my brother, he may be a good guy, he may be loyal and dutiful to his father, but he's just not the right stuff for this covenant. I'm the best hope for this covenant, and therefore
So,
I have to do whatever is possible to get it from him.
right. I think that is the story that Jacob tells late in his life.
Okay.
But at the moment, he is one perhaps of the most self-centered people described in Sefer Breshit.
Okay.
He only sees the world in terms of what is available or should be available to him. And where this really comes to home is in a couple weeks when he's going to meet Esav. It's the first when he divides his camp. It's the first time that he shows concern for someone other than himself because he wants to save as many of his children as he can. But now he's only thinking about himself. His brother comes in. I'm really hungry. I see you have some food. Let me have it. And Jacob says, okay, let me have your birthright. What's the connection? Why is Jacob even raising that as an issue? If he really thought he was a better fit, then you don't make it a transaction at that moment. He's preying on Esau's weakness.
Well,
Yeah,
And I think he knows that
yeah.
I agree.
because Esau has something that he wants. And all his life he's thought he's been entitled to it.
Well, why? Why does
Because I'll say I, because my name is Jacob too,
I
I should
could
have
see
gotten out of the womb first.
it.
I agree. I agree with you on this, but I'll put it in a slightly different, um, frame. Uh, Rabbi Yitzchak, you said, well, here we are, a couple of Yaakovs and a Yitzchak in our call. Uh, Yitzchak, you said, we layer over these stories is Cain and Abel, it's Ishmael and Isaac, it's Jacob and Esau, it's Joseph and his brothers. All these things are true, and I do think that we're supposed to read them in a cluster, as Barry noted. Yishmael will become Esau's father-in-law. They are all aligned as the rejected path, whom a younger brother supplants. But the I do think that Jacob is ambitious, uh, perhaps overly so, unscrupulous, certainly overly so, transactional in a not nice way. No, like as a Jew, if somebody comes in and says, "Oh, I'm so hungry," you're supposed to feed them, not take advantage of them. But I would say that part of the story that's going on here is one of the Bible's favorite stories, which is quick and clever outwits big, dumb, and slow. And I think that this part of the culture of biblical Israel, in which it was this teeny little people surrounded by great big empires in Mesopotamia and Egypt. And the story we tell about ourselves is a little bit of deceit is a part of the toolkit of a comparatively less powerful uh, group. So, think of how many people in the Bible get tricked by somebody who just outwits them. Um, you know, goes all the way down to Esther and Mordecai. It goes to Abraham with the wife sister episodes. It's the left-handed swordsman of Ehud who tricks the other guys. I feel like part of the story that's being told here, and one of the reasons why Aesop is bad leadership material, I don't really see it as this providential thinking on Jacob's part that really I'll be the worthy inheritor. Although that is true, and that's probably more um, Rebecca's way of thinking. But I think it appeals to the biblical, audience to think that the clever fellow is going to outwit the stronger fellow.
So are you putting this into the frame of what constitutes power? What
Yeah.
constitutes power in the biblical imagination is not physical brute power, but really
Yiddish
intellectual,
cup,
spiritual, manipulative power. Uh,
and the Yiddish cup,
all
right?
right. Well, I put that out to our viewers and listeners to kind of to think about that. These are really important questions. What constitutes power for us? Here we are in an age where Jews have power, in a sovereign state, but Jews also have a kind of influential power. Jews are Jacob in that model, and Jews ought not to be Esav, of course, and as a sovereign power. Jews have their power is to be an influence in the world through a state, I suppose. There's so many questions that are still on the table here. We barely even scratched the surface, but this is a good point where we have to bring it to a close. This parsha is I mean it excites us and inspires us because it deals with some of the eternal stories of the Jewish people and of each of our lives. Our families, our own relationships, and it's about who are we to become, and that's I think we're taking a snapshot of what we're going to see in the future. In the meantime, we want to thank our viewers and listeners, and
And we want to wish Yom Huledet
So-
Sameach
Sameach,
to
Yom
Elliot Malamet.
Huledet, Sameach.
That's right. This is my 50th anniversary of, well, my 50th anniversary of my bar mitzvah is coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm 63 today. So big mazel tov. Thank you all. Thank you, my colleagues, friends, companions, chavruta, and everyone watching, listening. Thank you for watching and being so loyal to us. Noam Kogan, mazel tov on your birthday too, right? Right. Okay. Everybody, Shabbat Shalom from the Hana.
Shabbat Shalom.
See you next week.